Good morning and welcome to the 133rd meeting of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. This is a televised meeting. Today we will continue our study of the challenges faced by senior women with a focus on the factors contributing to their poverty and vulnerability. And for this meeting, we are very pleased to welcome from Association Québécoise de défense des droits des personnes retraitées et pré-retraitées, Luce Bernier, the president, and Geneviève Tremblay-Rassette, the director. And also we have from RESU, FADOQ, Danny Prudhomme, the General Manager, the Provincial Secretariat, and Philippe Poirier-Monette, the Collective Rights Advisor, the Provincial Secretariat. I'll now turn to Luce Bernier for your opening statement, and you have 10 minutes? 7 minutes. We're cutting back. 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Parfait. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, members of the committee, of the Standing Committee on Status of Women, I'm very pleased to be here to meet with you today and to represent the Association Québécoise de défense des droits des personnes retraitées et pré-retraitées, so retired people in Quebec. I am Luce Bernier, the president of the Outaouais section. To begin with, I would like to present our association. We are based in Quebec and we have existed for more than 35 years. Our mandate is to advocate for seniors, people who are retired or pre-retirees. In Quebec, we have over 25,000 members in 43 branches that are regionally or locally based. We advocate on behalf of seniors, and we submit requests to the appropriate authorities on their behalf. The AQDR has a dynamic vision for aging as a time for fulfillment, as a time when seniors can take control of their own lives, they can grow and engage with their community. We want to play a leadership role in defending the rights of seniors, and this is our sole mission. I would like first to give you a bit of information on the issues facing women, but first a little bit of data on seniors in Quebec and Canada. According to the Quebec Statistics Institute, there are over 1,500,000 seniors in Quebec. 54.9% of those are women and 48% men. When we look at the statistics across Canada, we see the MEM tendency, that is, that there are many more women than men over the age of 65, and over the age of 85, that tendency is increased. So we have seen these trends developing over many years. We have 30% of the population in Quebec under 25 and 34% over the age of 65. So governments have already started to take these trends into account, but they need to do more to enable seniors to be change agents in society, because certainly seniors can play that role, but also to be people who can use their experience because they have solid experience in life at that point. So I also want to say that in Canada and in Quebec, we have the concept of gender equality, which has evolved significantly in the past 50 years, but much remains to be done to make this a reality in law and in our society. We know that there are persistent inequalities such as violence against women, and senior women are in shelters for women who have suffered abuse. There are discrepancies as well in the types of education and workplace conditions, difficulties balancing family, work, and school, and underrepresentation of women in decision making. Our organization supports the concept of healthy aging, and this idea was adopted by the Government of Canada in 2001 and recommended as a model to the Government of Canada in 2008. The idea of healthy aging is taken from the World Health Organization, and it means that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. To be able to assess policies and programs, we recommend to the Standing Committee the adoption of gender-based analysis. Gender-based analysis is a process that promotes gender equality through the policies and actions, and if it's used systematically, it can influence policies and programs and take into account the different situations and needs of women and men. So this would be our first recommendation in agencies and departments. If gender-based analysis applied, it is much easier to see whether policies on increasing contributions or other programs take into account the needs of women as much as they do the needs of men. I have a few other quick observations to provide to you. Canada's aging population is one of the most pressing strategic imperatives for any government. In Quebec, there is a hotline, a seniors abuse hotline. Between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., people can call if they have concerns. And according to their statistics, more than 70% of alleged victims are women. So more women are concerned, more women call. Senior women are poorer than men. Of course, there is a balance that is developing, but it will take at least 20 years for that to happen. Senior women are much more often those that take on the caregiver role, but there is little financial recognition for these senior caregivers. Yes, Madam Chair?
And I wondered, Madame, if Madame Tremblay-Racette would like 1 minute to...
1 minute?
Yes.
1 minute, Madame.
Okay.
Alors donc, ce que je veux porter à l'attention...
So what I really want to bring to the attention of the committee is the importance for our committee to have changes made to the way transfers are made to include the aging population. We would also call on the government to extend the GIS when the spouse or partner dies. For caregivers, it is important to have more support financially. There's also a need to deal with mistreatment and bullying. And this needs to be emphasized and addressed. We also feel that it is important to help women, that the government deal with anti-aging and emphasize the positive role of seniors in our society. Thank you very much.
For your patience. Now, Monsieur Danny Prudhomme, for 7 minutes? 7 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to appear this morning. We have recommendations for the Standing Committee on Status of Women. First of all, I want to tell you that our organization has over 500,000 members across Quebec, and we have a number of local offices. We were founded 49 years ago to try to help people get out of social isolation and have activities together. We have another aspect as well to our work, which is to advocate at different levels of government to help seniors for today and tomorrow to deal with issues. We want to tell you today that women are usually the ones that outlive their spouses. 20% of women in Quebec over the age of 65 are over the age of 65. And when their spouse dies, it is much more likely, twice as likely, that they will survive their spouse and that they will have financial difficulties because of the loss of contributions at that time. Old age security, as well as the allowance and the allowance for the survivor. Our organization would like to see those allowances and contributions extended at least 3 months after the death of the spouse. In 2007 and 2017, there was an increase in the amount of money that women earned, but they still earn less. 60% of women over the age of 65 are in the workforce. Many more women work part-time than men. And if we look at the various types of work that women do, 58% of them work at minimum wage. So they earn much less than men. And moreover, informal caregivers tend to be women, and 1 in 3 of them work, but only 1 in 5 men who play that role work. Many more women play both roles. Women earn less money, have less income. If we look at the guaranteed income supplement and the market basket measure, between 17,000 and 18,000 is the threshold for low income, and that depends on where people live. But women are much more likely to live at that level. So the government would do well to increase the amount of money provided through the GIS, either through the MPC plus 7 or the MBM 50. When people receive the guaranteed income supplement, and many of these are women, as I said, every $2 earned will result in a deduction of $1 from the GIS. So women have to take money out of their RSP or out of their RIF in order to meet their needs. If they need assistive devices like hearing aids or walkers, they also do not have the help that they want because these are non-refundable tax credits, and they again have to take money out of their RSP or their RIF. So when women have to do this, it should be exempt from taxes, and it should not affect their GIS payments. So those are changes we would like to see. For caregivers, as I mentioned, the majority of this work is done by women. And because they have less income to start with, they are affected more. We would call for a doubling of the amount provided for the tax income for caregivers, and that the tax credit be refundable, and that would help them financially. For people who are caregivers, we know that there is 15 weeks of leave for caregivers, 26 weeks for compassionate leave. We think that the contributions for that should be increased because right now it is limited to $562 a month. We would like to see protection of their jobs as well for 12 months. Right now, the 26 weeks cannot be extended, and there's no protection for the job. So there should be protection for 12 months while someone is playing the role of a caregiver. I'll give you an example. In 1985, we had 160,000 elderly people, and this will increase to 600,000 later. 6% should be the transfer increase every year in order to help provinces deal with aging because there will be additional costs. We also need to make sure that we have community-based services everywhere to help seniors. We know that we have new technologies, but many seniors don't have access to those technologies. And in some cases, there is not broadband or internet service. So we have seniors that are more isolated than they should be, and so we need the services available locally, and that will reduce isolation. And finally, we should be the transit tax credit that should be renewed. Thank you.
So good about the time. We're going to proceed to questions now, and we have a 7-minute round. The first questioner is Madame Sidhu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all being here. We know I met CARP a couple of times in my riding. I'm presenting Brampton South, and we know we need to do a lot more for our respected seniors so seniors can live a dignity life. They can live more respectful life. As you said, we know that there's issue of financial security. Once older adults become poor, they are more likely than youth people because less job opportunity. And you said mostly women's are facing more challenges. So what should we do, so they can get more opportunities or they can get more better life? Can you explain that, Mr. Dennis?
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you.
Si on parle des travailleurs d'expérience.
Thank you. There are a number of measures that we would recommend. It isn't true that everyone can work up to the age of 65 because some types of work are just too difficult. So there is we need an index that can show that for some types of work, 62 years of age should be the age at which people retire. and obviously people need income. What we would suggest is that there should be a contract with the government that if someone is sent for retraining, then that should be taken into account in the pension, and the person should not have to work 6 months more before being able to get their pension. And the second point is ongoing training. You mentioned ageism. Often people have a stereotype that older people can't learn, can't do the work as well. There should be ongoing training past the age of 35.
I'll just give you example for diabetes. If somebody, seniors have a diabetes, so they have to manage the diabetes with app. There's in my riding, 20% people, the language barrier, and they don't have any access to technology. If they have any access to technology, they don't know how to use that technology. So what should we do? The simplified thing, so our senior can learn. I know we have a Senior Horizons program, which is helping the isolation of the seniors, which is a great program, and I got very good feedback. So what kind of program we can set up so our senior can get that access of technology? They can manage simple diseases. Telemetry is another thing where they can manage blood pressure. So can you elaborate any of on that?
En fait, je vous dirais que dans
I would say that all the problems to do with technology require a respectful transition period. And there is this transition period that we have to take into account. For those of us who are used to technology, it's not that hard. We know that children now are born with a USB key in their hand, and we have to train people that need the training.
Isolation, loneliness, anxiety, depression, these are the other things. And then other point you made at the GIS, if we increase GIS, yes, increasing of GIS as a spouse can get a better life. This is another challenge our seniors facing. So for loneliness, what kind of community programs, like your organization is having that? Can you elaborate on those programs? Ms. Lucie Vernier.
L'isolement.
Well, loneliness and isolation are very often found among seniors. What the associations such as ours are doing, you were talking about technology. I will talk about a 19th century technology, which is the telephone. To deal with isolation, there are many services that deal with isolation in this way. For example, we should have services where people who have self-identified can be called every day to see if they are doing okay. Often, people living alone had only this daily call, and it was helpful to them. There is a lack of technology for other types of things, but there are these types of telephone services, but we need funding over the long term, and this is a difficulty for our association and others. Governments recognize that these calls are a good idea, but the funding only comes for 6 months or a year, and then we have to carry it on from there. So we need this type of telephone services. We need to also meet people and deal and address their interests. There are new services involving pharmacists, and we have met with pharmacists. They have a lot of good ideas to help deal with loneliness and social isolation. So direct contact is important. Mr. Prudhomme talked about technology, and I would like to say something about that as well. Yes, many seniors are less familiar with technology, but in Quebec and across Canada, there are all still places where it's very difficult to get access to the internet. For example, just 40 kilometers from Ottawa on the Quebec side, it is hard to get any access. So whether you're young or old, that's the case. So we need to make sure that internet is available everywhere and high quality service across Canada. Thank you.
My first question is for the FADOQ, Mr. Prudhomme. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit more on what you do with regard to helping seniors understand perhaps different phishing scandals that take place. So oftentimes seniors are victims of phone calls that are asking them for money for things, a donation or a gift in kind, or they receive a phone call from, quote unquote, the CRA asking them to remit money because they didn't pay enough on their taxes. We hear stories of the elderly being targeted with these types of phone calls and initiatives. Is there anything that your organization does in order to help these seniors? Would be my first question, and the second question would just be an overall reflection on what you're observing with regard to the prevalence of these types of things happening.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question. To start with, I would say that we have the Senior Horizons program that allowed us to set up a program to deal with mistreatment and intimidation of seniors. And over the past few years, we have held free sessions to provide information to over 75,000 seniors about the various types of fraud that can happen either electronically or door to door. We talk about the typical profile of those that commit fraud and also the typical profile of seniors that are victims of fraud. So we also talk about where people can call if they or someone else they know might be a victim of fraud. What we have seen is that certainly new technologies are a challenge because seniors didn't grow up with them and aren't familiar with all the details and ways they can be used. People might be a little bit insecure about even using legitimate types of services. So they need to have good advice and to make sure that they are on a secure site and to know that banks, for example, won't ask them about their accounts by phone. So there are different types of information that we provide to help.
And if someone is a victim of a phishing scheme, like one that I've outlined, is there assistance that is offered to them?
En fait, dans chacune des
In all of our regions, we have a police officer that provides the information with a volunteer, and there is an opportunity to speak to the police officer. So that's one way that we can help people to find a solution. When we receive calls, our employees are trained. They have a guide to refer people to the right place so that they can get assistance.
Comment a little bit further on the abuse that sometimes takes place toward those who are seniors. It's my understanding that oftentimes elder abuse actually originates within the family or a close caregiver. What are your observations with regards to the prevalence of elder abuse, and what is your organization able to do in order to assist those individuals, either through preventative measures or in response to elder abuse that takes place?
Dans un premier temps, au niveau
Well, We provide information sessions not only about fraud, but also about abuse. We talk about the typical profiles of abusers and victims of abuse so that people can identify these. We also provide information capsules where we have a daughter with her mother or a husband and wife and so on. So abuse can take the form of action or a look. So this helps people understand that anyone can be guilty of abuse toward a senior. As well, as my colleague mentioned, there is a seniors assistance hotline where people are referred and given help.
At this time, Madam Speaker, I would like to move a motion for consideration by the committee. This motion is being presented to the committee for the third time. Previous to this, it has been voted down twice by the Liberal members of this committee. The motion reads as follows: that the committee invite the Minister for Women and Gender Equality to brief the committee on her new mandate, given that Status of Women Canada has changed to the Department of Women and Gender Equality no later than Thursday, April 4th, 2019, and that this meeting be no less than 1 hour in length and be televised.
Okay.
Madam Speaker, the reason for this motion is described here, and that is, of course, because as of right now, the department, Status of Women, it works in conjunction with this committee. But the department has changed as of December 13th, 2018, royal assent was given. And so with that, the mandate has changed. Now, it was previously argued at this table by Liberal members that the mandate actually hasn't changed, that it remains the same, and therefore there is no reason to bring the minister forward. But in a number of weeks ago, we had the Director for Strategic Policy, Ms. Danielle Belanger, here at the table, and I asked her if the mandate has expanded, and she confirmed that it has. So she said this. She said, on December 13th, 2018, the Department for Women and Gender Equality Act received royal assent, which transformed the former Status of Women Canada into the Department for Women and Gender Equality. This brought with it an expanded mandate for the new department for all matters relating to women and gender equality, including the advancement of social, economic, and political equality with respect to sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. The department plays a central policy role in ensuring a more inclusive and equal society for all Canadians in the mainstreaming of the diversity and lens, also known as Gender-Based Analysis Plus, GBA Plus. I asked her to expand on this, to confirm once again that it had indeed expanded, and Ms. Belanger went on to say, and I quote, "The mandate has expanded." And she went on then to say the mandate has expanded to sex and gender and looking at gender identity and gender expression, as well as sexual orientation. I would say it's an evolution in some ways because we had been doing work with the LGBTQ communities to a certain extent based on some of our programming, but also we've been doing work with girls as well, and girls weren't part of the original mandate of Status of Women, so I think it's an evolution in that respect. End of quote. So it would appear then that the mandate has in fact expanded. I went on to ask her if she felt it would be a good idea for us to be briefed on that expansion, and she confirmed that it would. Now, further to that, interestingly enough, actually, in the minister's own words, on October 29th, 2018, I have a report here from the Government of Canada where the Honourable Mariam Monsef, Minister for Status of Women, issued the following statement on the introduction of the Budget Implementation Act of 2018, which included legislation to create the Department for Women and Gender Equality. And she said that her government recognizes that it must include a commitment to bring in legislation to transform Status of Women Canada from an agency to an official department in the Government of Canada. She went on to explain that its mandate must be expanded, and I quote, for the gender equality to include sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, and promoting a greater understanding of the gender and diversity lens, often known as gender-based analysis plus. So it is clear, based on the minister's own words, as well as the Director for Strategic Policy, Ms. Belanger, that the mandate of this committee actually has been expanded. Now, given that it's expanded, it would then seem appropriate for the minister to come to this committee and brief us on that expansion, and therefore then giving us an understanding of what is covered off at this table. Now, that seems like a reasonable request, I think, Madam Chair. But of course, as we know, in the past, 2 times before, the current members have voted this down because they don't want their minister to come to this committee or to have to answer our questions, which is interesting because we see this playing out in the government as a whole, where they are wanting to cover for individuals within their caucus and not allow light to be shed on decisions that are being made. We see this with the Prime Minister, where the Prime Minister actually withheld information from the Canadian public with regards to SNC-Lavalin and the former Attorney General of Canada, the fact that the Prime Minister pressured her unduly, and this information was attempted to be hidden. Now, interestingly enough, the members of this committee might be interested to know what the Prime Minister has stated in his mandate letters to all of the ministers. So I'll refresh your memory. This is what he said to Ms. Monsef. He said, I am honored that you have agreed to serve Canadians as Minister of Status of Women. Now, interestingly enough, you'll note it's Status of Women because she hasn't received a new mandate letter, even though she supposedly has a new mandate. So this letter is actually based from October 4th, 2017, which begs the question, where's the minister's new mandate letter? And if the Prime Minister is in fact inviting accountability from the Canadian public, then it would be appropriate to actually provide a new letter to the minister that she might be held accountable based on the things outlined within that letter. Nevertheless, I will continue based on the former letter, taking the Prime Minister at his word that these are in fact the things that he hopes to do on behalf of the Canadian public. So he says this, we promise Canadians real change in both what we do and how we do it. He sure did, hey? Lots more cover-ups. And he goes on to say, Canadians expect us to fulfill our commitments, and it is my expectation that you will do your part in delivering on those promises to Canadians. I expect Canadians to hold us accountable. That's interesting to me, because again, I've asked for the minister to come twice to this committee to understand her portfolio now that it's changed, which would fit within that category of accountability. But interestingly enough, the Liberal members of this committee have shot this motion down twice. Further, to the current case that is in the national media with regards to the former Attorney General and the Prime Minister wrongfully pressuring her or strong-arming her into doing his dirty work, it would appear that your party, the Prime Minister in particular, has absolutely no intention of being held accountable. Nevertheless, these are the words of his letter. I expect Canadians to hold us accountable for delivering on these commitments, and I expect all ministers to do their part, individually and collectively, to improve economic opportunity and security for Canadians. It is my expectation that we will deliver real results and professional government to Canadians. I have a different definition of professional than he does. Nevertheless, he goes on to say, if we are to tackle the real challenges we face as a country, Canadians need to have faith in their government's honesty and willingness to listen. Ooh, that's another phrase worth highlighting there. Your honesty. The Prime Minister doesn't appear to abide by his own words. He goes on to say, I expect you to report regularly on your progress toward fulfilling our commitments and to help develop an effective measures that assess the impact of the organizations for which you are answerable. I made a personal commitment, the Prime Minister's personal commitment, to bring new leadership and a new tone to Ottawa. I would surmise, based on the evidence that has been presented within the House of Commons, and in particular at the Justice Committee yesterday, that the Prime Minister has failed in this regard. He has not been honest with Canadians. He has not invited accurate accountability, and he has not brought a new tone to Ottawa. Unless, of course, untruth is the tone he's going for. He goes on to say, we have also committed to set a higher bar for openness and transparency in government. Sorry, that's laughable. Sorry, I was trying to hold it together on that one. but openness and transparency. Meanwhile, behind a closed door, I'm trying to strong arm the former Attorney General into making a decision that directly benefits a company that is being charged with criminal
thank you,
charges.
So I
Madam
don't see
Harder.
how this has
continue with
anything
the
to do
letter
with the
here.
motion that was presented, and
Yes.
it's
If we
really
want
going off topic
Canadians
right now.
to trust,
Madam Harder, your motion,
sure.
yes, one moment, please. Point of order, yes, Mr. Bertina? Oh, sorry, Miss.
Yeah, I don't see how
Lambropoulos.
this has anything to do with the motion that was presented or with our ministry that we're here for committee, that we're serving on this committee. So I don't think it should continue.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to remind you, Ms. Harder, that your motion has to do with bringing the minister to this committee, and you need to restrict your comments to that motion.
Okay. It seems appropriate to read the mandate that was written to the letter to the minister of this committee, that Minister for Status of Women, which is what this committee has to do with.
Thank you. And you did do that.
No,
and-
I'm actually not done. I got interrupted, but I have every right, according to the standing orders, to presume my conversation.
Thank you. But
The
yes,
mandate letter is in fact within the mandate of this committee. If it's not, if you're ruling it out of order, that I would read the mandate letter to the minister of this committee or of this department.
Pardon?
I think it's disrespectful to our witnesses that we're taking most of their time to answer our questions. We're here so that we can find out more on how to help seniors, and I don't think this has anything to do with it. If she'd like, we can continue reading this motion at a later date when we no longer have witnesses from Quebec here. I would really appreciate that.
Standing orders.
Yes, thank you very much, and I do appreciate your concern, and certainly we did come to hear the witnesses, but Ms. Harder is within her rights to continue with her motion. So, continue, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the witnesses, I do apologize. Unfortunately, we're given limited opportunity to bring these forward.
I'm sorry. I have another
Thank you,
point of
Chair.
order. Ms. Said-
But it has to
Zahid.
be, yes, she has the right, but it has to be relevant to the status of women and
I don't know
to
what's
this
more relevant
committee,
than the mandate letter.
not outside the preview of this committee.
I'm sorry, Ms. Zahid. She is indeed within her rights.
Thank you. The Prime Minister goes on to say, if we want Canadians to trust their government, we need a government that trusts Canadians. It is important that we acknowledge mistakes when we make them. I look forward to the Prime Minister's apology. Canadians do not expect us to be perfect. They expect us to be honest, open, and sincere in our effort to serve the public interest. Indeed, they do, don't they? Our platform guides our government. Over the course of our 4-year mandate, I expect us to deliver on our commitments. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that we fulfill our promises while living within our fiscal plan. Other issues will arise or will be brought to our attention by Canadians, stakeholders, and the public service. It is my expectation that you will engage constructively and thoughtfully and add priorities to your agenda when appropriate. As Minister, you will be held accountable, there's that word again, for our commitment to bringing a different style of leadership to government. What a vision. This will include close collaboration with your colleagues, meaningful engagement with opposition members of Parliament. That's a key phrase there, because right now today, the motion that is on the table is asking the minister to come here to this committee where she can engage with members of her party, the Liberal Party of Canada, as well as members of the opposition, the New Democrat Party and the Conservative Party of Canada. It would seem then to fit within the mandate letter that is written by the Prime Minister. These are his own words that I am giving today. Interestingly enough, I know you guys want to shut me down, but these are his words. So you're actually wanting me to stop reading the Prime Minister's words because it would appear that they make you uncomfortable. Nevertheless, in addition to encouraging the minister to allow the opposition members to hold her accountable and, let's say, invite her to a committee like this, he goes on to say, Canadians expect us in our work to reflect the values we all embrace. Those values, he goes on to say, are inclusion, honesty, hard work, fiscal prudence, and generosity of spirit. We will be a government that governs for all Canadians. Madam Speaker, I would ask for a point of order here. On the opposite side here, the members are chatting and I have the mic. So if you wouldn't mind just bringing that to order, and then I'll continue reading the mandate letter.
Yes, I would appreciate, though, Ms. Harder, if you would continue and wrap up quickly.
I'd love to continue. Thank you. So we will all embrace inclusion, honesty, hard work, fiscal prudence, and generosity of spirit. We will be a government that governs for all Canadians, and I expect you in your work to bring Canadians together. You are expected to do your part to fulfill our government's commitment to transparent, merit-based appointments. There's that key word again, transparency. To help ensure gender parity and that Indigenous peoples and minority groups are better reflected in positions of leadership. Interestingly enough, Indigenous peoples are better reflected in positions of leadership, but the only Indigenous minister was just strong-armed and then removed. As Minister of Status of Women, your overarching goal will be to ensure government policy, legislation, and regulations are sensitive to the different impacts that decisions can have on men and women. He goes on to say that he expects the minister to work with her colleagues and through established legislative, regulatory, and cabinet processes to deliver on top priorities. I would draw attention to some very key words within this mandate letter. Those words would be a transparent government, a new tone being brought to Ottawa, delivering real results, a government that functions with honesty, inviting the accountability and input from opposition members. All of these things seem positive. They're good. The Prime Minister was right to request these things of his minister. Where he's wrong, however, is in his hypocritical actions by which he himself does not abide by the words of this letter, nor does he permit the members of his caucus to do so. So my request today, then, is that the Liberals would live up to the words of the Prime Minister, as he goes on to say, we have committed to an open, honest government that is accountable to Canadians, lives up to the highest ethical standards, and applies the utmost care and prudence in the handling of public funds. He goes on to say, I expect you to embody these values in your work and observe the highest ethical standards in everything you do. When dealing with our cabinet colleagues, parliament stakeholders, or the public, it is important that your behavior and decisions meet Canadians' well-founded expectations of our government. Indeed. I want Canadians to look on their own government with pride and trust. Ooh, public opinion might say otherwise on that. As minister, you must ensure that you are aware of and fully compliant, this is a good one, with the Conflict of Interest Act and Treasury Board policies and guidelines. You will be provided with a copy of Open and Accountable Government to assist you as you undertake your responsibilities. He should have read his own mandate letter. He goes on. You must uphold the highest standards of honesty and impartiality, and both the performance of your official duties and the arrangement of your private affairs should bear the closest public scrutiny. This is an obligation that is not fully discharged by simply acting within the law.
You seem to be getting rather repetitive here, and again, I would like you to wrap up as quickly as you can.
Thank you. I am just reading the mandate letter from the Prime Minister, so if it's repetitive, I apologize. Those are his words.
Could you wrap up quickly, please?
Love to continue. Thank you. Please also review the areas of open and accountable government that we have expanded or strengthened, including the guidance on nonpartisan use of departmental communications resources and the new code of conduct for exempt staff. Madam Speaker, I have just read the bulk of the Prime Minister's mandate letter to the Minister for Status of Women. And it would appear then, based on that letter, that it is a good idea for the minister to come to this committee, that she be invited to come and be open and transparent, to provide us with reflection on her department and how it has changed, and to allow us, as members of the opposition, as well as members of her own government, to hold her accountable, to become more familiar with her department. And so I would again submit this motion for the third time, and it is my hope that the members opposite to me will uphold the Prime Minister's own words and allow there to be accountability, allow there to be transparency, allow there to be a new tone that is brought to government. Now, I understand that the minister is coming to this committee to talk about the estimates on March 21st. I am not asking for that meeting. That is for the estimates. I am asking for the minister to come to this meeting to brief us on the change of her department. So make no mistake. This is what I am requesting. I am requesting that the minister come, that we be able to ask her questions with regards to the change that has been made in her mandate, and that we therefore would be empowered to do our job as the members of this committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harder.
No, sorry, Madam Speaker, I'm not done yet. Thank you. Now I'm done.
Oh, thank you. We go to Ms. Zaid, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to our witnesses and your patience today. So, Madam Chair, we are conducting a very important study. We have witnesses here, and seniors are a very important component of, like, they are the pillar of our country, and we are conducting a study on the challenges being faced by the senior women and the factors contributing towards their poverty. With only 10 weeks left, I think it is important that we listen to our witnesses who are scheduled, and for that reason I would like to move an amendment to the motion which has been presented. The amendment is that the committee invite the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and relevant departmental officials to appear on March 21st, 2019 for the consideration of the supplementary estimates B 2018-19 and the interim estimates for 2019-20, and to brief the committee on the mandate of the Department for Women and Gender Equality.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zaid, and she has moved an amendment, and we'll go to Ms. Leach, please.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you, witnesses, for coming today. I'll be brief with respect to my comments on this motion. During my tenure as the... Is there a problem?
Yes, Ms.
Sure, we
Zaid.
have an amendment on the, so
Yes,
we
and-
cannot debate the motion. There is an amendment. I've proposed an amendment.
Pardon? We're debating the amendment.
I was in to speak to the original motion,
Oh,
so...
no, we have to
No problem.
discuss the amendment. Okay. Okay, is there further discussion on the amendment, please? Okay. Ms. Harder?
Yeah, it would appear that this is just another attempt of the Liberals to shut down real conversation and the opportunity to hold the minister accountable. As stated, it is already in the works that the minister will be coming to committee on in March in order to brief us with regards to the estimates. We know that that's already been confirmed. It's already a part of our calendar. That's not what I'm requesting. I'm not requesting on a financial analysis with the minister. I'm requesting that she come and brief us with regards to the changes that have been made in her department. And if this government truly cares about being transparent, truly cares about being honest with Canadians, truly cares about being held accountable by the Canadian public and those members of the opposition, if this government truly cares about changing its tone, then now would be the opportunity to function with integrity rather than following the premise that your Prime Minister has already set for you.
Thank you. And to the amendment, Ms. Lambropoulos.
Yeah. I think that this amendment is great because it gives opportunity to all members in this committee to ask questions of the minister on all topics, because we are including a briefing of the new responsibilities of this minister. So Ms. Harder and all others on the committee will have ample opportunity to discuss whatever they'd like with regards to this ministry to the minister on that day. We can, hold her accountable if we feel she needs to be, and whatever it is. And I'm sure that Ms. Harder will be able to say whatever rude comments she'd like on that day. Thank you.
Thank you. And to the amendment, Ms. Harder.
Sure. Sorry, Madam Chair, the language that was just used was actually unparliamentary language, so you may want to address that as the chair of this committee.
I would hope that all members of this committee would be respectful of each other and respectful of our witnesses.
It would be appropriate for the member opposite actually to issue an apology, as would be required in the House.
Ms. Lambropoulos, are you prepared to withdraw your comment in regard to Ms. Harder? Are you prepared to apologize?
I'm unsure of which part you're referring to.
Sure. So you said that I could make rude comments to the minister.
I would very much like this to be a positive exchange, and
Yeah, I did.
Wow. That's laughable, hey?
So was everything you just stated.
Ms. Harder has the floor, and I would like her to continue, please.
Okay, so the member opposite then allows her comment to stand. Thank you. I value that being on the record at least.
Great.
I would agree to an amendment if the amendment in fact allows or calls upon the minister to come for 2 hours for the full length of the committee rather than just one. This would allow us to achieve the goal that is stated within my motion. And Madam Chair, if I may, look, I'm being demonized by those on the other side because I'm bringing forward a motion with regards to bringing the minister to talk about her new department and its mandate.
Madam Harder, are you making a supplementary amendment?
I am making a supplementary amendment that the minister be called to come for 2 full hours.
Okay, thank you. Discussion? Yes, all right, we can indeed. All right, all those in favor of Ms. Harder's sub-amendment, please indicate. Okay, we have Ms. Harder and Ms. Leach. All those opposed? Okay. Thank you. Now the amendment. Now we need to go to a vote on the amendment. All right. All those in favor of the amendment, please indicate. Thank you. All those opposed? Thank you. The amendment is lost. And now the main motion?
The amendment passed.
Oh, I'm sorry. The amendment passes. I'm sorry.
On the main motion as amended.
Okay. And now on the main motion as amended. Yes, Ms. Harder?
So point of order first. My
Yes.
colleague had her hand up before, and so she has to be allowed to speak before a vote is taken.
I haven't spoken to the motion, the main motion.
Oh, yes. Well, certainly.
And then my hand is up to comment after.
Okay. Certainly to the main motion then. Ms. Leach. As amended.
Thank you very much. My apologies again for the back and forth. As I mentioned before, during my time as the Minister of Status of Women during the previous government, I had to present myself several times to this committee. Maintenance of transparency, I think, with respect to mandate letter, as it is with the estimates and other things, I think is very important for the Canadian public. I think it's exceptionally reasonable. And I would hope that the minister would understand that it's a duty of the office to be transparent to the Canadian public. And I would hope that that transparency doesn't just speak to the estimates, but speaks to the mandate. And I can tell you, having sat at that end of the table, as opposed to one of these seats, that it takes more than an hour to go through the estimates, and it takes more than an hour to go through the mandate alone, if you want to be fully available to the Canadian public. I personally think that the clarification would be exceptionally valuable. You know, one of the things that has been added to this mandate, at least we understand has been added to this mandate, is the involvement of girls. I had the good fortune as a minister to put forward at the United Nations International Day of the Girl on behalf of Canadians. I had the good fortune of having the first roundtable of just young women to present to Cabinet so that they would have an opportunity to have their ideas heard. Those are very important issues, and I don't think can be encapsulated in a 2 or 3 minute conversation with a cabinet minister when young women in this country are just as valuable as seniors. And that's just one piece of evidence from what we think is in the mandate that I think should be discussed. And so I would strongly encourage those on the other side here to consider having the minister here to speak just to the mandate, because it's a very important component of what I think the Canadian public expects. And quite frankly, I think the over 5 million Canadian young women under the age of 18 alone deserve to have that degree of respect. So I would just encourage you on the other side. As I say, it's not a lot of fun sitting down at the other end of the table as a cabinet minister, but I don't actually think it's as terrible as you may think. I think that it's actually extremely helpful for a minister to be able to speak to the Canadian public directly about what their mandate is and what they plan to achieve. Thank you.
And Ms. Sidhu, please. No. And Ms. Harder, did you want to speak to the motion?
I do. My colleague used a very key phrase here in that she said, what we think is in the mandate. Now, she's right in saying this because, of course, this committee functions according to a mandate that existed before December 13th, 2018. Once the new bill received royal assent and a new department was formed, that mandate is called into question because it's changed. It's been expanded. At least that's what we're told by officials and by the minister. And so, again, it seems appropriate that the minister would come and allow us to engage with her in order to seek a better understanding of what exactly that mandate is. So I'm confused as to why the members opposite of me want to shut down that opportunity for us to engage in meaningful conversation with the minister, that we might better understand her department and that we might better be able to serve positive outcomes on behalf of the Canadian public. And so it would seem then that the members opposite of me don't actually want to abide by the words of the Prime Minister and invite openness and invite transparency and invite a new tone that is brought to Ottawa. And so I would show my disappointment with that more than anything, not only on my behalf, but on behalf of all Canadians from coast to coast who would like a government that is transparent, who would like to know that the minister is inviting herself to be held accountable. The Canadian public that would like to know that the members of this committee are having their best interest in mind. And so with that, Madam Speaker, I believe you are going to proceed to a vote, and I would like that to be recorded.
Thank you, Ms. Harder. And I would like to have a recorded vote on the motion as amended, please. All those in favor of... Yes. Okay. Yes. All right. All those in favor, please indicate.
So, Mr.
Sorry?
Mr. Bettina.
Yeah, she's calling them.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Bettina.
Yes.
Ms. Lombropoulos. Yes. Madame Nassif. Yes. Madame Ms. Sidhu. Yes. Ms. Zaid.
Yes.
Ms. Harder.
No.
Ms. Leach.
No.
So the motion is amended is adopted.
Okay. The motion as amended is adopted. Thank you. And now we have to go to the next panel.
I would suggest that you suspend.
Okay. I would like to suspend, please, and we'll get ready to. And we appreciate you being here.
So,
You and I would like to welcome everyone back to the 133rd meeting of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. I would like to also say thank you to our witnesses, Luce Bernier, Geneviève Tremblay-Rossette, Monsieur Danny Prudhomme, and Philippe Poirier-Monette. We did not have time to complete questions, and I wonder, would the committee like those witnesses to return for further questions? Would you like those witnesses to return? Yes, madam.
I would like them to come. I have the FADOC in my both of them in my writing, and I had questions to ask, but unfortunately we didn't have the time. So I would like that we invite them again,
All right.
if everybody agrees with
Is
me.
everyone in agreement? All right, thank you. And I will ask Madam Clerk to
Thank
see if they can return. And now for our second panel, as individuals, we have Madame Catherine Twin with us in the room, and Madame Madeleine Bélanger by video conference from Quebec. And also we have from CARP, the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, Madame Wanda Morris and Madame Laura Kadawaki, both coming through video conference. Welcome. And Ms. Twin, I believe you wanted to proceed with a video.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here. Yes, I have two very short videos that I think are important for committee members to see. And I'm told now that the videos, unless they're in both languages, cannot be viewed. I don't know if the committee has any power to create an exemption. And if so, I would ask that they please consider that. I think these two short videos are very important to the issue that the committee is studying.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have unanimous consent to see the English-only videos? Everyone is in agreement? All right, thank you. I believe we'll need some time to set up the video, and so we'll suspend for a minute and give our technicians time to set up the video.
Thank you. Thank you.
You can give the floor to their opening statements.
Okay. Opening statement to Ms. Twin.
No.
Okay. All right. I'd like to begin with an opening statement, and with your indulgence, Ms. Morris, please. And you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Wanda Morris, my colleague Laura Katawaki, and we're here to talk about women and poverty. Our presentation is based on this document, the Faces of Canadian Seniors. It's our CARP's federal election platform, and FACES stands for Financial Security, Abuse Prevention, Caregiver and Housing Supports, Exceptional Healthcare, and Social Inclusion. If you haven't seen it, you can download it at carp.ca/faces. As well as our FACES document, we strongly endorse 2 reports which address these critical issues, that of the Older Women's Dialogue Project and the Center for Elder Law, We Are Not All the Same, and Commonwealth and Ryerson's National Institute on Aging, The Value of a Good Pension. In addressing the issue of senior women and poverty, we encourage the committee to consider strategies that address 3 goals: increasing retirement resources, protecting retirement resources, and making retirement resources go further. All are necessary and complementary. In terms of financial support, for our poorest seniors, increase the GIS amount. And secondly, cut back on GIS clawbacks, particularly on the top-up. Clawbacks on the top-up are equivalent to a 75% rate of tax. This is unconscionable. Increase the exempt amount for GIS beyond the current $3,500 and expand it to cover not just earned income, but also income from contracts, from pensions, and from interest. And create a seniors index that recognizes the inflationary costs of goods and services purchased by seniors. For those with some resources, help them to stretch them further by removing mandatory RIF withdrawals, or indeed consider eliminating RIFs altogether. Current RIF withdrawal rates do not reflect safe rates of return or expected longevities. Support deferred annuities. These are cost-effective forms of longevity insurance which are not currently viable due to ill-considered taxation policies. Support group pensions and group TFSA pension-like arrangements for low-income workers. A retirement dollar invested in a typical retirement scheme yields $1.70. That same dollar invested in a Canada model pension yields $5.32, 3 times the amount of an individual going it alone. Expand the CPP. The Canada Pension Plan Investment Board is a Canadian success story. Allow for individual contributions to take advantage of its strong returns and low costs. And financial literacy. Among other critical pieces of information, seniors should know they will often be better off by deferring both their CPP and OAS. While common practice today is for many to take their OAS at 65 and their CPP at 65 or even earlier. Protect retirement resources. Protect corporate pensions. Bring Canada in line with the US and the UK. It is not right that pensioners from Nortel and Sears in the US had their pensions virtually guaranteed.
I'm sorry, apparently our interpretation is not working properly.
Can you go out and see what that is?
Okay, yes, the fire alarm, is it, has it ceased?
It has,
okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, not helpful.
We're not that important.
Okay, back to protecting retirement resources. It's critical that pensioners be protected. It's not right that Nortel and Sears pensioners in the US had their pensions virtually all protected, while Canadians, especially those ones outside of Ontario, lost significant parts of their retirement resources. and call for investor protections. Canada lags other OECD countries. We pay some of the highest investment costs in the world and have some of the fewest investor protections. And finally, create a single complaints body for all financial issues, such as is done in the UK. Our fragmented system makes it incredibly difficult for seniors who have been wronged to seek and obtain financial restitution. For more, I refer you to CARP's submission on retirement security as part of the federal pension consultation. Turning to abuse prevention, protect seniors by amending PIPEDA. This is the personal privacy protection legislation. Banks currently are precluded from protecting women due to technical problems with the legislative wording. And review OAS and GIS eligibility for older immigrant women who have no financial support or are at risk of abuse by family members. Turning to housing, make retirement resources go further by supporting innovative housing options for seniors, co-housing and home sharing, and address housing as a commodity. Widespread empty units should not coexist with low rental vacancy rates and high rent costs. And regulate Airbnb and other programs that take viable housing stock and rental stock out of the market and contribute to seniors' homelessness. Laura, over to you.
For caregivers, many of whom we know are senior women, make retirement resources of caregivers go further by making current non-refundable tax credits refundable to ensure our most financially vulnerable seniors, those without taxable income, can benefit. Remove the requirement for employment insurance benefits that the care recipient be at significant risk of death, as physicians and family members in many cultures may be reluctant to label an individual as being close to death, which can preclude them from receiving the benefit. Provide a caregiver allowance, a benefit paid to caregivers providing significant hours of care. Such programs are already offered by governments in Nova Scotia, the UK, and Australia. Address the financial insecurity of low-income grandmothers caring for grandchildren, which is a particular issue in Indigenous communities. For exceptional health care, government needs to make retirement resources go further by investing in the National Pharmacare program, as right now 8% of older Canadians are foregoing needed medications due to the cost.
Thank you. We are at the end of the 7 minutes, and hopefully you can finish your remarks during the questions. So thank you. I'd like to go to Madame Madeleine Bélanger, s'il vous plaît.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my experience, because that's what I was asked to do. I was born in Sainte-Anne-de-la-Pocatière in the Lower St. Lawrence region in 1935, the eldest of 16 children. I think that the modest situation in which I was born and grew up in is like that of hundreds of women across the country. I want to talk in particular about the needs of senior women around me. I obtained my first teaching certificate at the age of 16. I also later earned a university degree as a teacher. I was a teacher for 35 years, with 3 years out in the diocese organization. I was at university for a year, and a year on with when my child was born. I have one daughter, and it wasn't our intention to have only one child, but we enlarged our family with 3 young teenagers who were refugees who arrived in 1977, 79, and 81. Very early in my adult life, I was invited to get involved in community-based organizations, in particular to help child laborers. In 1974, I signed the federal charter for the incorporation of an international assistance organization to help children in developing countries. As you have seen, age is a cruel equalizer. It affects all women to varying degrees. They have the same types of concerns and challenges, whether they have been teachers, housewives, or professionals in the workplace. But the stress is different when women live with their spouses in the last part of their life, or if they have financial security. I was listening to the other witnesses before me who were talking about all the various needs that are felt by women, and of course, women who have a strong social network. Women in their senior ages can share and want to share the richness of their life experience. They want to be valued and consulted. They want to stay in contact with public life, social life, and community life. And that is my reality, fortunately. I am fortunate to be still involved and active and well-connected socially. My children have not been too protective, and they did not try to place me in a home when my husband died. So I'm fortunate that way. Our world is fast-paced. Our institutions are aimed at efficiency and performance, and the requirements of the workplace make it so that seniors who may be a bit slow to do things and to move from one place to another and learn to use new technologies are at a disadvantage. Even ATMs can be difficult. The challenges facing those who are not financially independent or who do not know how to manage a budget or who have a child with disabilities who may be 30 or 40 years old. And then there are those who have health problems, who are in long-term care, who feel very lonely among a lot of other seniors that are forgotten like they are. These are real challenges facing many senior women. They are alone, facing a reality that is very difficult. They often decide to go to an institution. They would have preferred to have support from a member of the family or from a friend, but who wants to quit their job to become a caregiver? It is difficult to obtain recognition as a caregiver. It is also poorly paid work. And this needs to be reviewed socially and from a human point of view. Keeping people at home in their later years is an advantage for everyone. We need to do a lot to educate people so that active society does not exclude seniors. We need to enable seniors to continue with their ordinary life and be around people of all ages. Right now, we talk about old age security. That's a great ideal, but we are not there yet. The list of programs and services for seniors published by the government meets the needs of senior women who are healthy, independent, free to go out and about and have support. Seniors, though, that are less alert also want to stay in their familiar environment. They want respect. They want to be able to go out and to have the feeling that they are a full participant in society. These are difficult things to achieve because we need much more money to be spent than is being spent now. Seniors in, thank you, Madam.
We are at 7 minutes, and hopefully you'll be able to continue during the question period and hear from our committee. So thank you very much. I need now, merci. I need now to go to Ms. Twin, but before we do, we have unanimous consent for Ms. Twin to provide 2 videos. Apparently, there is also a PowerPoint in English only. Do we have unanimous consent to see the PowerPoint as well, or is it the committee's preference to see only the videos? I'm in your hands. Would you like to see the PowerPoint and the videos? Yes? Everyone's okay with that? All right. Thank you. Ms. Twin, if you could proceed then, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There will not be time to go through the PowerPoint, but I want to get to the videos very quickly, and we won't be able to watch all of them. I was unaware of the 7-minute time allocation. So let's start with the Eric Shirt video. He's from the Saddle Lake First Nation.
Juanes, and I'm also known as Eric Shirt. I'm from Saddle Lake Indian Reserve, born and raised there. That's my spiritual home. That's where I spend a lot of time. And that's probably where I'll die, and that's probably where I'll be buried. My brother, a relative, died, and I got to look at the obituaries, and this was the only funeral home that dealt with Saddle Lake. So I went through all the deaths there from 2011 to 2015. That's 5 years. And I pulled out all the names from Saddle Lake and Goodfish Lake and listed them. Then I averaged out the average age of death. And for women, it was 50 years old, 50.1. For men, it was 46.4. That's 46.4 for men and 50.1 for women. Now, there's no third world country that has worse life expectancy numbers. Now you think about that. No third world country has worse life expectancy numbers. The other one that jumped out at me from all the stats was what they call the same-day deaths. Kids that are, in the old days, I think I heard them described as stillbirth, same-day death. And when we tallied those up, what we found was that there were 60 per 1,000 births. So there were 60 stillbirths per 1,000 births. And the worst country in the world is Pakistan at 40 per 1,000 births. Now all of that tells you about the health of a community, in the sense that our people...
I'm cutting that short. You have the point.
What am I going to feed my kids for the night? If I put everything together, I'll be lucky if I get to make 2 pots of soup for the night. They won't go to bed hungry. But what about morning? They're going to wake up. What am I going to feed them? It showed the amount of oil that was being produced in how many wells in Onion Lake. It also showed the amount of money that Onion Lake was receiving in royalties per year for the barrels of day that were being produced. And where did it go? Look at my front door. It's not even on hinges. It's tied up by plastic. I keep my door on because I put a shower curtain rod between the door and the wall to keep it there. I was angry at my community because they know what's going on and nobody is doing anything. Because every election year, people are promised something, they're given money, and they're okay for the rest of the year. But I gotta sit here and try to figure out, what am I gonna feed my kids?
Okay, good. I hope you have the opportunity to watch these videos in full length. These are voices from the community, First Nation community. There's a cultural continuity in the sense that First Nations people have always lived in community. One of my heroes is a man by the name of Wendell Berry, who wrote a lot of essays, Sex, Economy, Freedom, and Community. And he said about the role and power of community, and think about this in relation to Indigenous women, including women 55 years of age and older, living on reserve. Community alone, as principle and as fact, can raise the standards of local health, ecological, economic, social, and spiritual, without which the other two interests, public and private interests, will destroy one another. Community. I would say the greatest challenges facing Indigenous senior women, 55 years of age and older, are poverty, inequality, toxic stress from unhealed historic trauma that's being intergenerationally transmitted, adverse childhood experiences, and I'm sure you've heard of the ACE study, and trauma-based behaviors when that trauma isn't healed. You hurt me, I hurt you. You attack me, I attack you. Mimemic structures of violence that are very alive and very real. And frankly, they operate here in Ottawa. I was here last night. I witnessed Jody Wilson's testimony. I would also say that in addition to those three, inequality, poverty, the toxic stress, there's ongoing structural violence by the state. Canada's failure to ensure equal protection and equal benefit of the law for Indigenous members, especially age-vulnerable women. And that includes senior women. I'd like you to put up the slide of my stepdaughter, Deborah Serafincian. Deborah is the daughter of my late husband, Walter Twin, who was chief of the Sawridge First Nation. He was a senator. She exemplifies, you see she's in a wheelchair. She's 55 years of age and older. Both her mother and her father come from Sawridge First Nation. But because of the operation of the Indian Act, Deborah,
so that we could have time for questions, I would like to give the committee the opportunity to pursue this further with you. So if you could, with the indulgence of the committee, if you could end there, and we'll go to our questioners, and hopefully you'll be able to expand on your remarks.
8 seconds. Had she been born male, her status would be different.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. We are limited in time, and so we'll begin round one. 5 minutes, please, with Ms. Lambropoulos.
Just Madam Chair, if
Yes.
they can send us a video, I don't know, can this share with the video with all the members? Can you send it to us? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind.
I'll be sharing my time with Salma Zaid. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to just take like 30 seconds to finish up if you would like. I know that you said if she was born male, things would be different, but would you like to talk about why or what you mean by that?
Despite the decision in the Deschanel case that came out of Montreal, despite Bill S3 that this Parliament passed, Deborah is still on the outside looking in. Had she been born male, she would have full Indian status and full band membership. She would belong to her community. But her life story was that she was scooped in the early 1960s into the child welfare system. And through operation of law, discriminatory law that's been declared discriminatory, that Parliament was told to fix, which it has not, she still suffers from that structural inequality. That deprives her of her belonging, her identity, and her community support.
Okay, thank you. Madame Bélanger, j'aimerais vous donner aussi.
I would also like to give you an opportunity, Ms. Bélanger, to add any remarks you'd like to. I know that it is not your situation, but perhaps the other women that you were talking about, for example, those who have lost their husband, have financial difficulties. So perhaps you could talk about the problems that arise when they become widows. The question is for you, Ms. Bélanger. Often, a woman who loses her husband has to manage the household, has to start managing the budget. The legislation that affects families and the social circumstances mean that a woman in that situation can have great difficulties because she's dealing with the unknown. She may not understand her financial situation at options. And I think that the problem really comes down to the fact that the husband may not have involved her enough, but we need to change the way people deal with this. They need to both be involved. So really, it isn't about legal requirements, but social requirements. It's clear that the upcoming generations, like mine, will have a much more equal relationship between men and women and how things are managed at home. But many senior women are now in that situation. What can we do to help them now? I think we need to listen to them. That is the most obvious problem as far as I can see. These women that have few financial means and have no choice but to go into an institution, they lose their value as a person. They lose the sense of self-worth. So there are committees, but they often only have young people, well-intentioned professionals, but the senior really needs to be listened to. They may be in long-term care, they may not be, but they need to be listened to. For example, FADOC, the organization that appeared and that I did not have an opportunity to hear this morning, really emphasizes leisure activities, assistance for managing finances, and so on. That is a difficult area. So I think the person concerned has to do some work, but also the authorities as well. Thank you. I will ask my colleague now to ask some questions.
But I thank you for your indulgence. And now for 5 minutes, Ms. Harder, please.
Thank you. I'll be splitting my time with my colleague. My question goes to Ms. Twin. Ms. Twin, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing the video clips. I look forward to watching them in their whole. My question for you is with regards to Indigenous women who you talked a lot about the need for growing up in community and belonging. That was a really key word that you used, that need for belonging. Now, I think sometimes governments take it upon themselves to tell women what they should do with their lives, what career they should pursue, whether or not they should be stay-at-home moms or if they should, in fact, enter into a career. Governments put policies in place that help direct women in the way that the government thinks they should go. But what I'm hearing from you is something very different, that women actually should have the freedom to choose their path, to chart their future, but that they need overall structural policies put in place that will contend for equality of treatment and opportunity. Can you comment on that further?
I think for a long time in this country, government policy, government practices, and government laws have dictated to First Nation communities on every level of human life, and the results have been catastrophic. And those have been driven by political interests, political agendas, not community interests, and not human needs. And the problem is that today, as I see it, we have now a shift to the other extreme, whereby the government has vacated the field when it comes to the rule of law and its application at a community level vis-a-vis fundamental human rights and freedoms. There's a balance that needs to be struck, and I believe that what government should be doing is supporting all communities, because Indigenous communities are the miner's canary that mark the shift from fresh air to poison gas. And what I heard the other witnesses speak to was the need for older women, and I am a widow. I was widowed in 1997. We need the support of our healthy, functioning communities. In a First Nation context, it's highly politicized, highly legalized, because Ottawa's policies are having a direct impact on rule of law. And you see that with respect to the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, because in 2015, we're not going to enforce that law. So there's Charmaine Stick. She goes to court, she gets a court order, it's upheld by the Court of Appeal, and she's still today being denied access to those finances. What type of environment does that create within a community if there's not accountability and transparency of the leadership to the people that they serve? Because it all turns on trust and affection, without which you don't have healthy, functioning communities. And communities, I would say, are essential to the raising of children, to the care of the elderly, to the support of the environment, to the protection of nature.
Thank you.
Merci. Madame Bélanger.
Ms. Bélanger, my name is Kelly Leach. I want to thank you for your appearance this morning and for being with the committee. I will ask my question, though, in English because I don't have good French.
One of the issues that I think faces senior women across the country are access to health care. You receive a lot of stories, I'm sure, in your day-to-day interactions with all the seniors you deal with. Could you maybe comment on if they bring forward any stories with regards to challenges with regards to health care access, and how, to your point, with respect to access to providing pensioner protections as well as financial protection, of whether or not there are healthcare challenges, and And once you have those stories, do you report them? Do you make them publicly available so that individuals like myself and other members of Parliament may be able to act upon them and
Thank you,
provide
Ms. Leach.
direction?
I'm very sorry, but we are at the end of our time here, and
Could I ask for consent from the committee just to hear?
Well,
a
we
brief
have to
answer?
vacate the room. We have to vacate the room because the time is up. What I would like to ask the committee is,
My apologies, Madame Belanger.
shall we invite the witnesses back so that we can, in fact, have the questions we would like to ask of them?
Yeah, I think we could invite both witnesses from the first round and second round because most of us didn't have the time, including Ms. Leach, and from our side also didn't have the time to ask them. And I think they had many things to do with seniors to tell us how we could advance women seniors in Canada.
Thank you. Do I have agreement in terms of asking witnesses back so we can ask questions? Well, thank you very much, because I too would like to ask some questions and had no opportunity. So thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses. You have been very patient and very kind, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the very near future. Meeting adjourned.